Chapter 34. Barrett burst in the room with his guardians right behind him. He spotted Mitchell hanging on the wall barely alive. He searched for and found Lucien being flayed alive. He rushed for Lucien's captor and slammed him to the ground. He knocked the knife out of his hand and the blade tinged along the concrete floor. Barrett saw a flash of fear in the male's eyes before he lunged for his throat. Bone and cartilage cracked under his teeth as he bit down. He pulled back, ripping the male's throat out of his neck. Blood spurted as the man's eyes grew wide with panic and fear. He opened his mouth but Barrett slammed his paw over it. Barrett wanted blood and vengeance for what was done to his pack, and he was damn well going to get it today. A female scream had him looking over his shoulder. Catty steal. He spat out the man's bloodied throat as he watched Damon and Jaden head for the two men who were restraining Catty. Her fingers found the silver necklace and she tugged it off. She stabbed one of her captors in the eye. He cried out and dropped to his knees as Damon and Jaden descended on them in wolf form. She looked scared as hell but otherwise was unharmed. Jackson was already by Lucien, paws on his chest and licking his face to make sure he was alive. Barrett shifted back into human and looked at Catty. She met his gaze unflinching. "You're Catty, right?" "Yes," she whispered. "You've got about 10 seconds before your brother comes running in here. So, get it together and assure him you're okay." He looked at Lucien. "I need to take care of Lucien." Catty beat him first and ran over to Lucien. She brushed his bloodied hair away from his forehead. "Lucien, please open your eyes. Please don't be dead." Barrett reached for the chains that bound Lucien's hands. "He's not dead. Not yet." He pulled the chains apart and Lucien slumped to one side. "Move back. I've got to get him down." "Jackson, shift back," Barrett ordered over his shoulder. He knew he shouldn't be walking around in front of Zane's sister buck-ass naked, but he had bigger concerns than worrying about offending her. Jackson shifted back and wrapped his arms around Lucien's waist to take his weight while Barrett cut his other wrist loose. Lucien slumped and blood spurted from his chest wounds. Barrett eased him on the ground. He looked over at Jackson. "Go cut Mitchell down and check on him, and then go tell Zane we need transportation out of the city, something that will carry us and our bikes." Damon and Jaden killed the two guards and shifted back into human form. Covered in their enemy's blood, they stood over Lucien with worried expressions. "We need to get out of here as soon as possible." Barrett looked back at his guardian and silently cursed. "Lucien, you hold on. You hear me?" He looked up at Catty. He knew then she meant something to him. "Tell him, Catty. Tell him he better not fucking die." She buried her face against Lucien's and whispered to him. He looked around and grabbed some dirty sheets laying on the floor. He quickly made a bandage before he placed them over Lucien's gaping chest. "Barrett, stop." He looked around on the floor and found the knife. Picking it up, he slashed his hand and made a fist. "What are you doing?" Catty whispered. "He'll thank me for this later." He squeezed his hand over his wound. Blood dripped from his hand into Lucien's wound. He reached for the makeshift bandage and tied it around Lucien's chest. "I can't get any transportation out of New Orleans. It's going to be hours before someone gets here." Zane ran in yelling. Zane stopped and glanced around the bloody carnage. He looked at Barrett and then at Lucien lying on the floor. Catty lifted her head and met his eyes. "Katie." Zane's voice cracked. "Oh my God, are you okay?" He knelt beside her and pulled her into his chest. "Did you get hurt? What are you doing here?" "I'm fine, Zane." She wiped her tears and looked back at Lucien. "Lucien's not." Zane frowned and looked at the guardian. "Will he make it?" Zane looked at Barrett. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here," Lucien managed to say. Everyone in the room came over and knelt beside him. "It's just a fucking scratch," he murmured. Catty buried her face in the crook of his neck and sobbed. "It's more than a scratch, dude." Jackson's tone was low and serious. "I'll be all right." He gave a weak smile. "So how the fuck are we going to get out of here?" Jaden asked. "We're going to walk out of here." Everyone turned toward the unfamiliar voice on the other end of the room. Barrett jumped up, ready to shift. His guardians flanked him, making a protective wall between the danger and Lucien. "Easy. I don't want to fight. Least of all with the Arkansas Pack Master." The figure stepped forward into the light. He was covered in signature head to toe. Black leather, and he held his hands up. Lorcan. Barrett cocked his head. What the fuck do you want? Come to gloat over your brother's body. Brother. Jaden looked from Lucien to Lorcan. Holy shit, Lorcan is Lucien's brother. Did you guys know this? He looked around the room and the other guardians shook their heads. Don't everyone sound so pleased, Lorcan said. He frowned when his gaze landed on Lucien. Why the hell is Lucien here? I told him not to come back to Louisiana. It was too dangerous. Well, he didn't listen. Lucien was on a mission to find my guardians. Barrett nodded over his shoulder. We've gotten Mitchell, but Jaime is still missing. Lorcan's eyes darkened. Not missing. Dead. If I know Bootier, he probably fed his body to the alligators in the swamp. You fucker. Zane lunged, but Barrett caught the werewolf before he could make contact with him. What are you doing here, Lorcan? Are the Louisiana assassins now hunting guardians? Is that what your pack master has assigned you to do? Rage boiled in Barrett's veins until he was consumed with hatred. You won't believe me if I told you. Lorcan looked away and then back at Barrett. Right now you've got to get out of here. Lorcan pulled out his phone and punched in a text. A few seconds later it dinged with a message. Fuck. He slammed his hand into the wall of the tunnel. Concrete fell to the floor from the hole he left. I thought I had an ambulance that could carry your men out of here. But it's stuck in traffic 5 blocks away. Why are you doing this? Why are you helping? Barrett didn't trust assassins. Because I don't like the ruler of our state. Because tyrants like him will always find a way to make others suffer. I believe in judgment and justice. That's why I became an assassin. Bootier is neither of those things. He rules his state with fear. I want out. I don't believe you. Then don't. My focus is to get Lucien out of here. He looked at his brother. I owe him that much. You owe him more than that. The trill sound of a cell phone echoed in the cavernous space. It's not mine. Lorcan held his hands out. Everyone looked around before looking at Jaden. Jaden frowned and picked his phone out of his pocket. Hello. Everyone watched as he listened intently to the unknown caller. He hung up. We have our ride. Right outside the door of the club. Jaden shook his head and snorted. Who was that? Barrett asked. Granny. Chapter 35. The Guardians marched right out of the XXX, carrying Lucien and Mitchell. Barrett had seen some strange things in his lifetime, but the fact they were walking out bare-ass naked into the public was one thing he'd never forget. They'd ripped their clothes during shifting, so the only one who was covered was Zane and Catty. Lorcan walked beside them, holding back anyone who dared to get close. Thankfully Catty had the presence of mind to grab some tablecloths off the tables on their way out and cover Mitchell and Lucien up. Waiting right in front like she promised was Granny in the driver's seat and Haley in the passenger seat of an old RV. They all climbed in and slammed the door before Granny pulled away from the curb. Good Lord, none of you have any clothes on. She pressed her lips together. I swear I have never seen so many moons in all my life. Granny, I never thought I'd say it, but I'm damn glad to see you. Barrett admitted. Her face brightened as she turned off the street onto the main highway. Does that mean you can put me on staff? No. They all answered in unison. She scowled. Hey, sweetheart. Jaden grabbed Haley and kissed her hard. Hey yourself. She giggled. How did you know where we were? Jaden quickly tied a towel he'd found in the bathroom around his waist. I knew something was up when I saw Lucien, so I got Haley to stay a little longer. While we were here, I met that young lady there. She motioned to Catty at the coffee shop. I could smell Lucien's scent on her and knew they were together. I knew Barrett had a tracer on all his guardians' phones, so I hacked in and found out where Lucien was. And I saw that you were all headed this direction, so I stayed. I kind of figured you boys might need some help getting out of trouble. You hacked my system? Barrett could feel another migraine coming on. Not me, I had help. Who? I can't tell you. Granny waved her hand in the air. Anyway, we saw you all roll into town and we followed you to the XXX. When you guys didn't come out, I knew you were in trouble and I knew you needed help, so I commandeered this RV to come get you. Commandeered? You mean you stole it? Jaden's mouth dropped open. Haley shook her head. She said she would go out with this old man if he let her borrow his RV. Well, I lied. I don't like bald men. Plus he had bad breath. I'll have someone drive it back to him later. She shrugged. What about our bikes? Damon asked. I've got it covered. Lorcan pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and, after a quick conversation, hung up. I've got Brutus and Killen on it. They are going to load them up and drive them back to Arkansas. He glanced at Barrett. That is, if it's okay if we cross into your state. Barrett glared. There better not be one fucking scratch on any of those bikes. Understood. Lorcan nodded. So now what? Damon came and stood by Barrett. Some of the guardians gathered around Lucien on the bed while the rest crowded around Mitchell on the couch. Now we get home and we bring this before the other packmasters. Barrett looked at Lorcan. Do you know if any of the other states are involved? He shook his head. I don't think so. If they were, Bootier would have bragged about it. What do you want in return for your help, Lorcan? Everyone wanted something. It was the way of the world. He walked over to Lucien and lowered his voice as he addressed Barrett. I want my brother's forgiveness. You did something that most find unforgivable, Lorcan. Barrett stated. When you scarred his back, he could never take the guardian tattoo. That's exactly why I did it. He looked up, his eyes filled with pain. When I found out what Bootier was and how cruel he was to his own guardians, I didn't accept the position. I lied and told my parents I didn't get in. I had no idea Lucien was going to apply. We got in a fight and I wanted to stop him. I accidentally pushed him into the fire. When I pulled him out and saw the state of his back, I knew Bootier wouldn't accept anyone less than perfect. So I poured salt in the wound to keep it from healing. He felt that pain for months, but I felt it every day of my life since. I thought he was at least safe from Bootier if he wasn't a guardian. He cut his eyes up at Barrett. I didn't count on a packmaster accepting him into his pack. I don't look on the outside. I prefer looking at a man's soul. Barrett stated. The only thing I want in return in my brother's forgiveness. It's one thing that has always eluded me. It's the only thing you never asked for, Lucien whispered. Everyone turned and looked at him. The room grew silent. Lucien opened his swollen eyes and gazed up at his brother. I forgive you, brother. Lucien closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Catty checked on Lucien in the infirmary one last time before gathering her meager things. Barrett had allowed her to stay at Lucien's bedside with strict orders that her family leave her alone. He knew she wasn't ready to see her parents and she appreciated the time with Lucien. Lucien had healed quickly over the last few days and she wondered if it had something to do with Barrett's blood. She glanced at the time and grabbed her bag. She couldn't put it off any longer. She had other business she had to tend to. Business which included her parents and Zane. She walked out of the building into the sunshine and squinted. She'd not been outside since they arrived in Little Rock and she wished she had some sunglasses to protect her from the glare of the sun. She had come here with nothing but the clothes on her back. Everything else had been left behind in New Orleans. Even her money. She walked along the sideway toward the pub where she knew her parents and Zane would be waiting, where they'd be asking her a ton of questions. She'd gotten Barrett to arrange this meeting so she could talk to them all at once. She wanted to get this over with and move on with her life. When she reached the front door, she took a deep breath and opened the door. She stepped inside. Immediately she spotted her mother looking around for her and froze when her mother met her gaze and she hurried toward her. Her father was right behind. Catty. Her mother enveloped her in a tight hug and wouldn't let go. Tears streamed down Catty's face and emotion welled up in her throat. When she pulled away, her father cradled her in his arms. Hey, sweetheart. I've missed you. Zane was next. He hugged her so tight she thought she'd suffocate. When he let go, Skylar grabbed her and cried along with her. When the hugs were all done, she looked at each of them and took a deep breath. There's a lot I need to talk to you about. Where I've been and what I've been doing. Honey, we don't care. As long as you're home. Catty shook her head. No. It's something I have to get off my chest. I need to tell you. You all need to know the truth. Skylar smiled and reached for her hand. She squeezed it and nodded. Let's sit down. We need to listen to what you have to tell us. Just remember, it doesn't matter. We still love you. Catty blinked back the tears and followed them to the quiet table in the corner. She waited for all of them to sit before she started. I should say this and get it out. Then I can get through the how and why. Everyone was giving her their attention. She told herself this was like pulling off a band-aid. Just hurry up and say it. First of all, I changed my name to Catty. I did it for my job, but now I'm used to it. She loved the way it sounded on Lucien's lips. She'd made the decision after they escaped she would keep her name. She was a different person than when she left Arkansas. She was now Catty. Okay, I like Catty. It suits you. Her father nodded and smiled. There's more. While I was in New Orleans, I worked as a stripper. The words fell out into a bottomless bucket. She held her breath, waiting for the disappointment from all her family members, including her best friend, Skylar. When no one said anything, she frowned. Did you hear what I said? Yes, dear. Her mother nodded. And Barrett told us if we didn't listen to everything you said and give you a chance to speak, then there was going to be hell to pay. She leaned in and whispered. Frankly, dear, Barrett might be good looking, but he's quite scary. Catty didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did the only thing she could. She told her story. Lucien had been waiting for Catty to get back from visiting with her parents. He'd been worried since she left, and he hadn't stopped watching the clock. The door opened and he lifted his gaze. A smile broke out across his face as Catty hurried over to his side and pressed a kiss to his lips. Hey, sweetheart. He kissed her back. I missed you. I was only gone half an hour. She giggled and climbed in bed with him. How did it go? Pretty good. No one was angry and everyone said they still loved me, I think. The only one upset was Zane. Really? He'd have to set her brother straight when he got out of this bed. He said he didn't appreciate you touching his little sister. She giggled. He laughed. Well, he better get used to it. I'm going to touch you a lot from now on. He pulled her close for another kiss. I guess you were right. My past doesn't define my future, so now I can focus on what I want to do. She looked up at him and blushed. I told my dad about that online test. Lucien, I think I want to research what it takes for law school. I think that's a great idea. You think so? You think I could do it? I know you can. He entwined his fingers with hers and looked into her eyes. I know this is soon, and I know you've wanted to be on your own and find yourself. But I have to tell you something. What? I love you. I loved you since the first day you yelled at me. I know you need time to find what you were meant to do, and I'll support you. I'll support whatever you want to do. I just want a chance to date you, to take you out and love you like the lady you are. Catty, will you give me a chance? She blinked and then threw herself into his arms. He winced. Oh, sorry. She pulled back and looked at his wound. Did I hurt you? The only way you will hurt me is if you say you don't want to be with me. I want to be with you, Lucien. I love you. His heart thumped wildly, out of control with love for the woman in front of him and the future he saw ahead of him. This time he was getting everything he wanted, and he wasn't going to take it for granted. I just got off the phone with Jack Wellborn. Barrett glared at Riker across his desk. And he's not surprised about Edward Boutier. Says he's been unhinged for years. He said the other packmasters try to steer clear of him and try not to rock the boat. Are you shitting me? So what the hell are you going to do? Surely this has to go before the council or an investigation into his pack. Riker stood and paced the room. I'm calling for an investigation. But Jack said don't hold my breath. He said the only one who could accuse Edward is Big Mike, and apparently since I ripped his throat out, there's no living witness. But Catty heard Big Mike confess. She's a witness. Barrett shook his head. His thoughts were going a mile a minute. In order for an accusation to be made against a packmaster, his accuser has to do it in person. Catty heard it secondhand, and it won't ever stick. Plus I wouldn't want to put her in that position. Boutier is evil enough to come after her. I'm not putting her life in danger. So now what? You call for an investigation? An investigation you know won't turn up anything. For the time being. He looked at Riker. Boutier is thinking I'm going to follow the rules like always. He's not expecting me to do otherwise. Riker's eyes lit up. I'm listening. So while the investigation is going on, I'm going to do a little investigation on my own. You gonna tell me? Or make me wait? I'm going to make you wait. Barrett grinned. You're such a hard-ass, Barrett. Riker scowled. Well, here's something to cheer you up. Wellborn is pretty pissed about his witch escaping from Yazoo. He wants her back so she won't cause any more trouble. I thought she could only escape for a little while. Should she be back in the cemetery by now? She should, but she's not. So we need to send a few guardians out to find her. Don't send me. Heard she's like a black widow. We'll fuck her mate to death. I'll send Jackson. Barrett grinned. He always did like a challenge. Lucien pulled up to the worksite of Skylar's house on his Harley. He'd spent half the night making love to Catty, so he slept in today. Dude, you're late. Jackson teased as he picked up a stack of 2x4s. Yeah, I am. Lucien pulled off his leather jacket and draped it on the seat of his bike. He was hot as shit and he wasn't going to keep wearing his jacket to hide what he was. They'd all seen his back when they got him out of the underground tunnel. They knew what he looked like. No point hiding now. What's up? Damon walked over and pounded his fists. Ready to get to work? Hell yeah. Lucien headed to the truck. He piled up some lumber and grabbed a hammer. Hey man. Jackson eased up beside him. Glad to see you here today. Me too. The alternative is pretty fucking bad. He laughed. No shit. Jackson agreed. He tugged his shirt off and tossed it on the back of the truck. I swear it's like 150 degrees and not even noon. He picked up his wood and walked back to the site. Lucien set his lumber down and looked around at his brothers. They were all shirtless and still sweating like pigs. Fuck it. He tucked his shirt up and over his head. Picking up his wood, he headed toward the worksite. He held his breath and walked over to the rest of the guardians. His back was to Damon and Jaden, and Jackson was beside him. When no one said anything, he stood up and sighed. I was burned in a fire. That's why my back looks like this. I know, dude. We all heard Lorcan cop to it in the RV. Jaden said. I was going to rip his throat out for you, but he said he felt like shit. So I didn't, Damon stated. Lucien frowned. You all heard. He'd gone in and out of consciousness on the ride back home. The only thing he did remember was Lorcan's apology. Well, yeah, it's not much space for all these large asses in an RV. Plus I was trying to get to the back so I wouldn't hear Granny talk about some old fart propositioning her for a booty call. Jaden cringed. Yeah, it's the stuff nightmares are made of. Damon snorted. That's not funny, man. Jaden stood and shoved Damon in the chest. Don't want to go there with me, Jaden. Damon growled. Don't talk about my granny. Jaden bowed up. You're the dickhead who brought it up. Damon countered. For fuck's sake, can you two ladies stop with your cat fighting? We are supposed to be listening to Lucien. Jackson groused. Actually, he held up his hands and shook his head. I'm good. Continue with whatever you were doing. He looked at Jackson as Jaden and Damon continued to bitch at each other. You could have told me, you know. Jackson arched his brow. Lucien ducked his head. I should have. I'm sorry, man. Jackson grinned. It's okay, dude. But I do have to say something. You really should put your shirt back on. He narrowed his eyes. Your abs are better than mine. I don't need the competition. Understand? Lucien laughed. Yes, they were a dysfunctional family, but they were a family nonetheless.